More now with Dan Greenhaus, Chief Economic Strategist over at Miller Tabak. We're hearing an awful lot about what may or may not happen with some of the financials in terms of the regulatory environment. Is it good the way the momentum's moving, or are we missing a lot of things here?
I think, it's very difficult to say. I mean, on the one hand, conceptually, it makes sense that you want to have financial firms that take risk, not necessarily excessive risk, but risk, tie their compensation practices to some sort of sustainable growth pattern. You don't want to see them just handing out assured bonuses, if you will. At the same time, and I was on with Bernie Lowe about 2 weeks ago, I equated the idea that the United States would be regulating private compensation packages to aliens landing in the middle of Manhattan in terms of believability. Yeah. And yet here we are, where the United States is on the verge of doing just that. And I think it's not really a question of whether there's regulation. The question is what form it takes and what effect it has, and that's the uncertainty since we don't have a final bill, if you will.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I mean, does it really matter at the core? I mean, Wall Street just wants to know what it is and have it behind them, right? Is it really one of the main issues that banks have to deal with right now?
It's a big issue because you're talking about, I mean, listen, if every bank the globe over adopted the same principles, it would be easier to be on board with it, although many people still would not, but it would be easier to be on board with it than if just the United States does it, because you put our banks, from a salary standpoint, at a competitive disadvantage. And while we can all argue the social outcry of AIG's group that caused the crisis getting bonuses, it doesn't change the fact that if we're not going to pay them, someone else has. And if you don't adjust, someone else will. And if you don't adjust or deal with that fundamental idea, then capping compensation practices is only going to hurt the banks that took the TARP money in the first place.
Let me ask you about another big topic. You know, we've been talking a lot about executive compensation, but also the deficit. And you had the president actually come out. He says the economy's pulled back from the brink. He says the government must now get serious about reducing debt and helping spur job growth. I know a lot of folks I talked to said what bothered them is that it felt like the administration wasn't even looking at what was going on in terms of the debt picture. Good news to hear the president start to kind of let this stuff out slowly? I
would say two things. The first is that, and we can tie this into the weakness in the dollar, which is the story du jour every day here on out. I believe that the deficit, $1+ trillion for 10 years or so, is the fundamental issue in the currency market with respect to weakness in the dollar. And if the administration is able to get that under control, you can see some firming in the dollar, although certainly actions speak a lot louder than words. The second and more important point is we have to remember that the administration is of the belief, and is surrounded by people that is of the belief, that spending money right now is a necessity. And while we can argue whether or not the 2009 budget was left over from the previous administration, which a lot of people would argue that it was, it doesn't change the fact that the 2010 and 2011 and 2012 budgets are his. And unless he gets that under control, you're going to have weakness and a loss of confidence. That said, again, he is surrounded by people who think that the government is the spender of last resort right now.
And that may be right. We don't know.
And that may be right. We don't know. I would argue that to some degree they are right, but that's another 4-hour conversation. But
we got time. We got time.
But in the immediate term, that's what they believe. And while it's a positive to hear them scaling that back, we're certainly going to hear from a number of administration supporters that are probably, like a Paul Krugman, that are less receptive to that idea.
Let me ask you quickly. That's a fundamental issue. You say the core issue for the currencies. What about for the economy? I mean, I was telling you before, I was talking to Dan Alpert from Westwood Capital. He's coming on later. He says that getting these legacy debts off of the bank's balance sheets is really the most important thing for the economy as far as getting the consumer back in.
Well, got to be quick here.
Far be it for me to argue with a genius like Dan Alpert, and I won't. I would simply say that I like the original idea, which was taking distressed assets off bank balance sheets, and while we never knew how we were going to do it, conceptually it makes a lot of sense.
All right.
Because they're still there, potentially.
They're still there.
All right. Dan, thanks so much.
Thank you.